Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the start of free agency for the 2052 to 2053 offseason. The Rockies are fresh off a World Series championship, and it's already been a busy beginning to the offseason for us. We re-signed Elijah Moore, who finished second in the NL MVP voting this year, to a relatively long extension, 7 years total, with a player opt out after 5 years. Also made a minor trade, getting rid of arbitration eligible shortstop Caceres, who was looking for a pretty big number for someone who was really going to be a utility infielder for us. And then we also dealt with arbitration on all of our other arbitration-eligible players, most of whom we ended up bringing back. And as free agency really begins in earnest today, we're in a really good position. We've got almost $42 million for free agents. And when I look back at our roster from last year, we haven't lost a ton of talent. On the pitching side, we lost our closer, Rios. And we also lost another right-handed reliever, Ethan Mingo. Both of them are available in free agency if we want to bring them back. And then as far as everyday players, it's really just the utility infielder, Tony Caceres, who I already mentioned, who we've lost. So essentially, we need to replace a closer at this point. And then the rest of the money we have available, we can use to improve the team. And in our last episode, I was talking about potentially using that money on an infielder. Give us someone who could maybe be an upgrade at second, shortstop, or third base, perusing the free agent market, and even pursuing who's out there just in general that we could try to trade for. There's not any obvious options of players who would be a clear upgrade to what we have that are actually attainable without trading away multiple major leaguers or the 5 best prospects in our system. So I've been kind of thinking about pivoting in a different direction, and this is something that 3/4 Badger brought up in the comments to the previous episode. And that is thinking about maybe center field as the way that I can improve the team. There is this really good, potentially good, young center fielder, Hector Rivera, who is a international player who came over, who is a free agent right now. Looks like he has great outfield range, great speed, and a mediocre bat, but a fair amount of gap power, which with that speed should at least result in a lot of doubles and triples, particularly playing in cores. So the thing that I've kind of thought about based on the comments to the previous episode, and just as I've thought about things more deeply, is that our center fielder at the end of last year was Danny Ruiz, who we originally brought on as kind of a utility infielder and an all-on utility player. He could certainly go back into the mix as perhaps a starting second baseman for us, or the super utility role that we had brought him on for. You can see he's very good defensively in the outfield, but he's also potentially very good to respectable defensively at pretty much any infield position we could play him at also. So given that there is not an obvious infielder that I think we can add to upgrade our team, potentially bringing on Rivera as a center fielder, if he ends up being good enough to start in center field, could kind of allow me to improve the infield in a backdoor way by moving Ruiz from being our starting center fielder back to a role in the infield for us. Now, the only problem with that is that it's going to take me 3 weeks to get a scouting report on Hector Rivera. And as I look at most of the other free agents, you can see that my scouting accuracy is low to average. And that's because our longtime scout retired at the end of the season. And this is something that I talked about last episode too. And I completely agree with the comments in the last episode from Patrick DeBonis on this, that it's pretty unrealistic that when a scouting director retires, all of a sudden the organizational knowledge on every player out there plunges. Just a little thing in the game, but it is unrealistic. But unfortunately, I'm in a situation right now where free agency is starting, and I don't have the greatest sense of a lot of these players. Now, I have gotten... this is the OSA rating, so I'm talking a little bit wrong here. I do want our new scouting director, Zane Collins, and when we go back to the pitchers in particular, you'll see our former closer, Ricky Rios, here, and you'll see that we have gotten up to very high accuracy on several people over the last couple weeks since we hired our new scout. We are not in as good situation with the potential offensive players, although we have scouted a few of them also. But it's just something that I'll have to deal with. But certainly with OOTP 24 coming out in less than 3 weeks, can't imagine this is going to be a change that they would have made, but think it would be a little more realistic if perhaps there was some kind of decay function for several months on your previous scouting reports that you could largely interact if the new scout was pretty effective. But going into free agency with poor scouting accuracy and a bunch of amateur international free agents, not necessarily amateur, but international free agents that are coming through that we think could be interesting, like Rivera, it's going to take weeks to kind of get up to speed on them. Not, to use my catchphrase, an optimal situation for us to be in, but regardless, we'll muddle through the best. So I have made that minor league contract offer to Rivera. My thought is at the very least that probably gives him a little time to think about it before he'll come back to us. I'm assuming someone will offer him a major league deal since he's looking for about $5 million. We certainly have the money to do it, and we have so much money at this point. And the free agent class is, in general, so uninspiring that I may just have to pull the trigger on an offer to him before we get that scouting report to potentially bring him on board. The other thing that I am considering is center fielder Eddie Farley, who's another free agent. He's looking for $32 million a year, but he is an excellent defensive center fielder with potentially well above average home run power and eye, which you can see has manifested itself in about 100 walks a season and over 30 homers a season for the Red Sox. As a right-handed hitter, where he's probably been knocking some doubles off of that green monster, I think he could put up really big numbers in Coors over the course of his career. And you can see it's been a really weird career. Oh, I'm actually looking at postseason right now, so that's not accurate. Not as weird a career as I thought. He's been up consistently. But this is a guy with 462 career home runs. Going to turn 33 shortly. 146 OPS plus, 145 WRC plus for the course of his career. But certainly over the last 4 years in Boston, I don't know if it's been the move to Fenway from Detroit or just him getting older, but he has been a much less productive offensive player over the last 4 years than he previously was. That said, a center fielder who goes out and puts up a 120 or better WRC plus while playing the type of defensive center field that we think he will, which includes 1 Gold Glove, is a very interesting player. And fortunately, since he's right here in the U.S. and a major league player, we've only got 1 day left on the scouting report for him. So if we want to spend most of our money in one way and decide that Rivera is not the way to go, I think Eddie Farley as a center fielder would be what we would consider. And that would also potentially let us move Ruiz back to a super utility kind of role, or perhaps become our starting second baseman, which would achieve our goal of improving our infield in this offseason also. Only downside with Farley is that that's going to use up the majority of the money that we do have available, which is going to ensure that we don't put a lot of money into our pitching staff, because Ricky Rios is looking for $17 million now. We had the opportunity to sign him for about $14 million before he hit free agency, and we decided against it. So if we bring him back, it's not going to be a good financial decision. I like his durability. I like the great movement he has on his pitches. I like his extreme ground ball tendencies. The thing that worries me about him is that he's on the verge of becoming a one-pitch pitcher. His knuckle curve is still close enough to major league average that if he mixes that in with his outstanding fastball, he can still be effective. But he's looking for 4 years now. It's $17 million a year. And I think that price is really high. I have gone through all of the options that are on the free agent market. The only other one that really kind of interests me is Jaden Bethel, who honestly has a somewhat similar profile with the durability, excellent movement, extreme ground ball tendencies, average control. Does have a 3-pitch arsenal. A little bit younger in the case of Bethel. Bethel wants to be a starter. I'd prefer him as a reliever, but he wants to get paid starters money, over $18 million a year for 7 years. So I don't think we do that. If the price on either of those players comes down, I think we would consider bringing them on. Otherwise, I think we're likely to go to the lower end of the reliever market. And as far as our closer for next year, right now our manager has Chase Crawford slotted in as our closer. This is a guy who did start for us a bit over his first 2 years with the team, moved totally to the bullpen last year where he put up a 3.74 ERA, but a 2.44 Sierra in 65 innings pitched. Extreme ground baller, good movement on his pitches, 3-pitch arsenal, lots of stamina. I think he'd be fine as a closer. I'm actually right now leaning, though, towards Juan Vargas, who you may remember we moved out of our rotation to make room initially for Will Lucio last summer, and then eventually for Jose Ortega when we brought him on in a trade. But if I could actually show you what I want to talk about. Juan Vargas, I think, would be a pretty interesting option as a closer for us too, now that we've yanked him out of the bullpen. Certainly has the stamina that if we need him as a spot starter down the line, he could do it. But he also has extreme ground ball tendencies, 2 really good pitches with the sinker and the slider. His other pitches aren't that great, which I think is part of the reason why he started struggling as a starter for us. But there's part of me that thinks the left-handed pitcher Vargas may be a better option as closer for us than the right-handed pitcher Chase Crawford if we don't end up with somebody else in free agency. So that's kind of the high-level view of what we are thinking here as free agency begins. I think if we end up going with Rivera as our outfielder, then there's a chance we'll sign one of those bigger pitchers that we talked about. Even though the money's a little high, we've got money to spend. We are, just as a practical matter, nearing the end of this playthrough, given that OOTP 24 is coming out in a few weeks, and we'll likely be pivoting to that. So we might as well spend the money while we have it. And if we end up signing one of those players to a longer contract, we're probably not going to be playing the out years in it anyways. So that's one option. And then I think the second option is if we end up going with Eddie Farley as a center fielder, that's going to give us a certainly better hitter today than we would expect to have with Rivera. Although, again, our scouting report on Rivera is not all that nuanced right now. But if we end up going with Eddie Farley, then that means as far as pitchers, we're definitely going to be looking towards the lower end of the free agent, someone we can spend $3 or $4 million a year on to join us as a likely setup man out of the bullpen rather than a closer. And then we would likely be moving either Vargas or Crawford permanently into that closer role for the beginning of next year. So I think those are the two paths ahead of us. Right now, we're going to just kind of sim ahead and see if we start getting some of these scouting report backs that will give us a little more confidence in what we should potentially do. And we have gotten our updated scouting report on Eddie Farley, so now we have very high accuracy on him. We think he's a 4-star player. It is interesting, though, his speed is nowhere near we had previously thought it was. So that gap power does appear to be a little less useful than we thought it was when we thought his speed was just incredible. So useful from that perspective to have the enhanced scouting report. And this is something that has been talked about in the comments also that I do agree with. I think 3/4 Badger has mentioned this over the months also, that it's a little incongruous sometimes to see someone like Eddie Farley, who has outstanding outfield range, incredible base runner, pretty good stealer, but his speed itself is actually kind of well below average. But it is what it is. I think that Farley has certainly proven that he is an effective major league hitter, and he would actually be an upgrade defensively in the outfield over Ruiz, and that would allow us to improve our infield with Mr. Ruiz also. So Farley is definitely a temptation. The only concern that I have about bringing on Farley is the money. And we've got the money to spend. The issue is just, as always, it comes down to trade-offs. And there is certainly the argument that young Hector Rivera could give us 95% of the defense that we're going to get from Farley. Maybe better speed. We still don't know him as well. He's certainly not the same kind of bat. But he's a left-handed batter, whereas Mr. Farley is a right-handed batter. And if they're both good players, maybe we potentially have room for both of them on the team. When I look at the organization broadly, in team chemistry, Bobby Mata, the left fielder who we picked up in the Rule 5 a year ago, certainly I think could be a useful offensive player. But I don't think he is good as either Farley or Rivera when you look at the whole package with the brilliant defense of both of those players, although I like Mata's speed. And he does have a bad relationship with our manager at this point. So certainly in terms of Bobby Mata's development, we could put him down in AAA for a year, get him away from Nick Hartman and that bad relationship, and that would open up a couple of spots potentially for us to bring on both center fielders. Now that would obviously result in us using up potentially the vast majority of the free agent money that we have available this year, which would really necessitate that we shop at the bottom of the barrel for the pitcher or two that we want to add. But in terms of team building, it would give us a lot of redundancy in terms of great defensive outfielders, which have been pretty important to us in our success that we've had in Coors Field in recent seasons. So I think I may think about doing that. I just, there's obviously some chance that Rivera will just accept the minor league offer we've made to him. I think it's pretty low, given his profile, the fact that he's looking for $5 million. but it's possible. Farley, I think it's just a matter of how many years he wants and how much money he will ultimately go for. He wants 7 years, $32.8 million. I'd offer him something shorter than that, given that he's already almost 33 years old. And Farley was looking for 7 years, $32.8 million with a player option in the 7th season. We are offering him 6 years at an average of $30.5 million with a team option for the 6th season. And you can see contract that's a little lower the next few years that will likely be playing with the Rockies, or that we could possibly be playing with the Rockies. Conceivably, we could be playing in those out years, but I think it's unlikely with OOTP 24 coming out. But I don't think it's an egregiously backloaded contract by any stretch of the imagination. So the question is whether he'll do a year less in about $2.3 million, a year less in salary. We also didn't give him the no trade clause. But he's willing to think about it as an initial offer. And if we come in with that $26 million figure for this coming season, that'll give us a little more flexibility to potentially add both Rivera in center field also if we want to. And then while that won't give us the opportunity to potentially be shopping the highest end of the pitching market with the likes of Rios and Calderon and Bethel, definitely would allow us to hopefully bring on a decent reliever or two also to help the bullpen. And then presumably, as I've talked about, we'll move either Vargas or Crawford into the closer role. And that's obviously something that we could certainly address as the season goes along through the trade market. And not shockingly, Mr. Rivera doesn't want to sign a minor league contract. Another one of those international free agents, Jose Sanabria, also looking for a major league contract, which I get. Jaden Bethel, we did get the scouting report back on him. I think it largely looks like what we thought he was. He's a proven pitcher at this point. The money, I think, just is going to be very tricky for us at this point. And we also actually did get our updated report on Ricky Rios. He is what we thought he was also. I'm going to have a tough time paying either of those guys $16, $17, $18 million. So I tend to think that the direction we're going, maybe focus on the center fielder, improve our second base in our infield by moving our current center fielder back to a starting second baseman or super utility role is the way to go. And then given the amount of money we've invested in pitching over the past few years, and the fact that we think we've got 5 really good major league starters at this point, along with 2 or 3 guys in our bullpen who we'd be very comfortable starting if we have some injury issues, I think we're probably okay looking more for right-handed pitchers who are just effective middle relievers, not necessarily back end of the bullpen closer type talent. I think we're probably okay with that being the direction we go this offseason. And unfortunately, we're still 2 weeks away from our report, a more accurate report on Jose Sanabria. And we're still 2 weeks away from a better report on Hector Rivera also. So I'm going to keep trying to play games with them. They say they didn't want a minor league contract, but if I offer them a minor league contract with major league options, can we continue to just do this dance? Nope, he really wants a major league contract. I'm guessing that Rivera is going to be a similar situation. I'd love to... Actually, Rivera is willing to think about the minor league contract, which becomes a major league contract if he's promoted. Okay, that's good. I don't know that I want to be spending $5 million on him, but I want to keep the conversation going. $3.5 million if we put you on the major league roster. What do you think of that, Hector? All right, he's willing to think about that. So that at least gives us the option to keep the conversation going with Hector Rivera and to kind of drag things out with him for another week while we wait to see what happens with the offer to Farley, and we wait for our scout to come back with a report on him, which granted we probably still won't have when he responds to this offer. Sanabria only wanting a major league deal, not granted we have very low accuracy, but for a 26 soon to be 27-year-old that we think looks maybe slightly above average. If we lose him, we lose him. We don't really need another lefty in the pen at this point. So we'll wait for the full scouting report on him before making a decision to actually offer him a major league deal. And if we lose him, we lose him. And then as far as what's going on with Rivera, I am, as some of you know, sadly, a fan of the New York Jets. And what we are doing with Hector Rivera right now appears to be somewhat similar to what the Jets are doing with David Carr and Aaron Rodgers. I think David Carr appears to be plan B for the Jets, but the Jets are trying to make him feel appreciated and loved and that they're extremely interested in case things don't work out with Aaron Rodgers, who I believe is their plan A. And I'm kind of doing something similar with Hector Rivera right now, where I'm giving him offers that I don't think he'll accept, keeping the line of conversation going while we try to get the scouting report on him so we actually know him a little better. And then we also try to figure out what happens with Eddie Farley, who we also have already made an offer to. And speaking of Eddie Farley, he has signed that contract with us. So we have got a big-time center fielder, I think both offensively and defensively, who should definitely upgrade that position for us. It was kind of a weird situation last year. We traded away our longtime center fielder, Tony Padilla, who was fragile in terms of his injury proneness and getting banged up a lot. He had been a very productive offensive player for us at times and was also good defensively, but felt that with the super utility guy Ruiz, we had the opportunity to move on from Padilla and make our team better overall. And it ended up that with the moves we made, we won a championship. So I think it worked out. But at this point, we are going to move or set the position for Danny Ruiz back to second base. And we are going to put Mr. Farley onto our roster and just see what the lineup looks like from Mr. Hartman at this point. And he does have Ruiz slotted in back as our starting second baseman, which puts Rogelio Terrazas, who's a pretty good second baseman, also back into a utility role for us, which I think is fine. So I think this move makes sense. We've upgraded in center field, added another bat that can bash some home runs, which a bit surprisingly for the Rockies when you look at our stats from last season. Home runs is really about the only core category that we didn't lead the National League in. We were second in home runs. So certainly the addition of Farley should maybe help us be the best team in the National League and possibly the best team in baseball in terms of hitting the ball out of the park next season. But I feel like we've upgraded at center, both offensively and defensively. And I'd say, to be fair, Ruiz and Terrazas is pretty close in terms of their ability at second base. I don't want to say that it's a huge upgrade to have Ruiz there instead of Terrazas, but at the very least, having Terrazas now as a utility infielder for us is a big upgrade of our utility infield position. So feel that this deal helped us on two fronts. And we've still got about $12 million for free agents. And keep in mind that at this point we do have, an offer out to Rivera that we're still waiting to hear on. But happy to have Farley on board. Clearly that's going to be our big move for this offseason. and think that it's helped make the team better, both offensively and defensively, and in terms of our overall depth. And as we get ready to head towards the winter meetings in a few days, we are going to increase our ticket price just a little bit to $35. We were already at, I believe, over 100 fan interest before we signed Farley. Clearly, we're well over 100 now, even if we were only at exactly 100 before. We will certainly be taking a bit of a hit when we lose Rios, since he's a pretty popular player. But I think coming off of a season where we were first in the league in attendance, almost 4 million people at our games in Colorado, and we won a World Series championship. The fans are really interested. They're loyal. I think we can justify a little bit higher ticket price as we head into the 2053 season. So now that we're set at center field and the infield, and we still may enhance the outfield with Rivera, time to definitely turn our attention to the pitchers who are available. And I don't love to go after players who have serious injury issues, but I am tempted by Sal Lofton, who's going to be out another 2 to 3 months with a torn rotator cuff, but that only takes him to February, so he should be ready for the start of spring training. The question, obviously, is what will he look like on the other side of that torn rotator cuff? But you look at his profile today, he's a ground baller with extreme ground ball tendencies, really good movement on his pitches, nice two-pitch arsenal with a sinker and a cutter, walks more batters than I would like. And honestly, in terms of his stats over the course of his career, he's been an average-ish type pitcher, which, given his profile, seems a little surprising. He certainly looks to me like, particularly as a reliever, he should be putting up above average types of numbers in terms of his ERA and his FIP minus. And he does have, one of his worst seasons was a year when he started 13 games. So maybe that factors into a little bit, but he certainly wasn't great last year with a 163 FIP minus on the season, admittedly in a small sample size. But he's looking for about $4 million right now. I don't know that I want to offer him that much. I think he's probably going to be insulted if I offer him a minor league deal with major league options. But I'm going to at least do that to get the conversation started with him. He may not accept it at all. He is a pretty proven pitcher, but maybe coming off the injury, he's willing to do something a little more team-friendly. I doubt it, but I always like to try new things, and the worst he can do is say no and have his nice smiley negotiation mood go to a very sour-faced emoji. Yeah, he's not interested in the minor league deal. All right, well, we've at least started the conversation with him, so I don't think there's any need to act on him right now. I guess it's always possible that someone just jumps on him and signs him over the next couple weeks, but a lot of times with these players that are injured, they tend to linger on the list of available free agents, and we may be able to revisit things with him in a month or two. All right, and good news that Hector Rivera, at least initially, is intrigued by our offer. So that's certainly positive to have him favoring that offer of a minor league deal with major league options. Once we get the scouting report on him, would feel better about potentially making him a full major league offer and perhaps something for multiple seasons. But in the absence of better scouting information, I think what we're doing now at least gives us the optionality to potentially get him into our organization and under our control, get to know him a little better, and then maybe we try to sign him for an extension during this season if we think that he is as good a player as he might be. Might cost us a little more over the long term, but we're also potentially avoiding making a big mistake since our scouting information on him is mediocre at best at this point. And Ricky Rios is gone, so he will no longer be an option. Didn't think we were going to have quite the money anyways. He signed with Toronto, only $11 million a year, an investing option for next year. So it's money that could have worked for us, given that he said he wanted $17 million in 4 years when we were talking. I tend to think if we had offered him $11 million, given that it's early stages of free agency, he would not have accepted that same type of offer from us. I think that's just kind of one of the things in the game that happen sometime, and it really doesn't bother me because I think as good as AI has become over recent decades, it's still not as good. And if you need to give the computer controlled teams a little bit of an advantage by allowing them to sign players for less than they might sign with a human controlled team, I think that just helps keeps things a little more balanced. So would I have brought back Rios at $11 million? Quite possibly. Am I heartbroken that we didn't bring him back? No. And then two of the other international amateurs that we looked at in our last episode, Ishmael Cabrera says he doesn't want a minor league deal, and Kai Wee also says that he doesn't want a minor league deal. Still waiting for an updated scouting report on Kai Wee. Ishmael Cabrera, looks like we could request another one on him at this point. Don't think we need to chase after either of those players. Think that if they were willing to go into the minors for us, they'd be great organizational depth. Kai Wee, I don't mind him. I think he's a decent potential fallback if we lose out on Rivera. Like the home run power, he's not as good defensively, but still a very competent defensive left or right fielder from what we think right now. So if he's still out on the market when we do get this scouting report and things don't work out with Rivera, I would view him as a interesting fallback option for us. And I was wrong about Sal Lofton. I didn't have to stay out there despite coming back from the torn rotator cuff. The Red Sox signed him for $3.3 million just 1 year. So I thought he was one of the more interesting options, but wanted to kind of get to know a little more about him. Unfortunately, that will not be possible at this point, but we are scouting a bunch of the free agent relievers at this point, particularly ones with good movement. So hopefully in the next week or so, we'll have a better idea of the opportunity set. Hopefully in the next week or so, we'll have a better idea what, if anything, is actually going to happen with the offer that we've made to Rivera. And then we can start maybe zooming in on where exactly to go with some of these relievers who have better movement on their pitches. And Jose Sanabria, the international free agent signed with the Phillies, looks like a little less than $3 million, but it is less than $3 million this year, but average of about $3.2 million over 3 years. So he did get the major league deal he was looking for. Again, to me, he looks like a pretty generic left-handed reliever without a better scouting report on him, which, of course, we'll have a day from now. I wasn't going to offer him a major league deal. So the timing on that one just did not work out for us with the fact that we had lost our scout about a month ago at this point. And we did get our scouting report back on Kai Wee, so we're now high accuracy, not very high. I like him defensively. I like the personality. Not a ton of speed, not a great bunter. And although he's got the home run power, that's really all he brings to the table offensively. Again, if things don't work out with Rivera, would I think about it? Yeah. But we also have to keep in mind that we have fourth and fifth outfielders like Milhinos and Mata and even Jose Brito right now, three guys who we had picked up in the Rule 5 draft over the past 4 seasons. So I think our backup outfielders are kind of fine, and particularly if we bring on Rivera, I think we're in a great position in the outfield then. And I think we've kind of found at least a reliever or two we're going to make offer to right now. One that we aren't right now, but that I do like a decent amount is Marcus Caldwell. Extreme ground baller pitcher type, decent movement on his pitches, guy who could start or relieve. But he's fragile and he's looking for $6.5 million, and he's coming off of a not great year with a 4.90 ERA for the Cubs. So I think he's on our radar down the line if his price comes down. But right now I'm really going to go more towards the bargain basement with Manny Orozco, who was even worse for the Cubs this past year with a 7.05 ERA and has the type of personality I tend to always want to avoid, but I feel like we've got a strong enough locker room at this point that we can probably handle one eccentric and moody reliever. But he's an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. He's only looking for around $2 million a year. Also a ground baller with extreme ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid-90s. He wants to be a starter. I don't want him as a starter. I would only use him as a right-handed arm out of the bullpen. But if we can get him for a decent amount, I would consider it. I actually may even offer him actually, he's looking for a minor league contract that becomes a major league, which is what I was leaning towards. He's looking for a little more money than I was hoping to offer him, but he does claim to have an offer from the Braves right now, so I probably should be a little more competitive. But if we can bring him on for $2 million and have the optionality to see what he looks like in spring training, I think that would be a good deal for us, and he's willing to think about it. So right now at this point, we've got these minor league offers with major league options out to now first Rivera and now Orozco. Hopefully we'll be hearing from Rivera relatively soon. Would like to get him on board because once we do that, feel like our everyday players, we've got more than enough to put our roster together next year, barring some crazy injury situations in spring training. And that would really allow us to kind of pivot to focusing on the pitching staff for the rest of the offseason. And we've got the Rule 5 draft in about a week, so going to have to put some eligible players onto the 40-man roster, most notably Cameron Miller, who was a first-round draft pick in 2048, number 29 prospect in baseball, only 6-8 with a 4.33 ERA in Double-A this past year, so that was a bit disappointing. But still think that he can become a useful major league pitcher. He doesn't have strong ground ball tendencies, and his personality is not great. So he still is a player that we may end up trading away at some point before he becomes a significant major league contributor for us, but certainly don't want to lose him for nothing, and we've got plenty of room on the 40-man. So he's the obvious player that we needed to add. We'll see if there's anyone else who we want to protect from the Rule 5 draft in about a week. And Kai Wee has come back to us and said that he's interested in resuming contract talks. So we'll offer him a minor league contract again. I don't know that he's going to go for it, but certainly if we could have a player like him in Double-A or Triple-A and get to know him a little better over the next year, it could be something that could pay dividends, particularly if we had some injuries in the outfield at the major league level next season. I don't think he's going to go for a minor league contract, but he came back to us hat in hand. We're not going to increase what we offered him. We'll offer him the exact same thing we did before and see if maybe he's willing to accept it. And another loss, Ethan Mingo, right-handed reliever who we declined an option to make, I think, $4.3 million this past year. He only got $1.2 million from the Giants, but apparently was a very popular player, extremely popular. He had been a solid reliever for us over the past few years. Just didn't think he was worth $4 million. And as you can see, his control and his stuff are not quite major league average even at this point. So we were fine moving on from him. The fans were not fine with that, but you can see that even with the departures of Rios and Mingo, who were the two, really the only two free agents that we were going to lose this season, still fan interest above 100 even with their departures. So feeling good right now about how this team is positioned, and just hope that we can have a good Rule 5 draft today, and then maybe find out in relatively short order what Mr. Rivera and Mr. Orozco want to do with the offers that we've made to them. And we're here at the start of the Rule 5 draft. We'll auto-draft until our pick, which is right at the end. We did lose Jalen Hoskins, 25-year-old relief pitcher. Not somebody that we protected. He's almost 26 years old, not very good movement on his pitches, and he's an extreme fly ball pitcher. So he was not someone that we protected. I guess we could have, just to be difficult, but I just didn't see him having a big future in our organization. So we'll see whether Detroit can keep him up all year. And now we will move on to our pick. And we've had pretty good luck in the Rule 5 draft over our first 4 years. In Colorado, we've ended up keeping one person that we picked in the Rule 5 draft each of those first 4 seasons. Not sure if it's going to happen this year. Scouting director recommends we don't do anything. We're going to take a flyer on DJ Cortez, 34-year-old right-handed pitcher. As we've talked about, we may need another righty arm in the bullpen. I don't know that he's going to be good enough to make our team, but I like his personality. I like his durability. I like that he's a ground baller with ground ball tendencies, got good movement on his pitches. Question is whether his stuff and his control are really good enough for us at the major league level. Over the course of his career, he's been, a little below average in terms of his performance in the few opportunities he's had in the major leagues. Don't think he's going to make our team, but we're willing to bring him into camp. So we'll draft DJ Cortez here in the first round of the Rule 5. And we've got another guy that we're thinking about in the second round, so we'll see whether he is still available for us. And it was a position player. And he is still available. Edgar Estrada, second baseman, who we actually, when we were GM of Pittsburgh in our final year with Pittsburgh in 2048, we picked him in the 4th round. Durable second baseman, hit .291 with 11 homers and double-A ball last year. His defensive ratings are really not that great, but he could play a competent-ish left or right field. And he's got an interesting enough bat that I at least want to bring him into camp. I don't think he's going to continue our tradition of having young players who we brought in the Rule 5 draft who make the major league roster coming out of spring training. So we may end up sending him back. But I think it's worth at least bringing him into camp and seeing if maybe there's a little more than we see right now, particularly with the fact that our scouting in general right now is not very good. So while we're thinking about it, we'll actually request an updated scouting report on him now that he's part of our organization for at least the next few months, and we'll see whether he somehow magically makes the 26-man roster coming out of spring training. And that is going to be it for us in this Rule 5 draft. So we will finish things up, take a look at the summary. A little surprising that the World Series champions end up picking 2 people in the Rule 5 draft. You can see the Rangers ended up picking 4. As we talked about, we did lose Jalen Hoskins. We brought on DJ Cortez, who I think would be a better right-handed reliever for us this coming season, potentially, than Hoskins would have been. Hoskins was just never going to work for us with below average movement on his pitches and extreme fly ball tendencies. I don't know that Cortez will make the team, but at least it's one more option in the mix for the potential last right-handed arm out of our bullpen. And really good news, we did get Hector Rivera signed. So we were up to high scouting accuracy on him, and he still looks like a very interesting potential outfielder for us. Going to owe him $3.5 million if he ends up on the major league team. at the very least we can keep him in AAA for close to a month before having to make that decision, get to know him a little better. But we'll request another scouting report on him now to hopefully get up to very high scouting accuracy. But definitely feel like he is certainly in the mix to be a fourth or fifth outfielder for us this year. And having him in the organization now gives us a ton of flexibility in center field. We've got Farley on board, who is obviously our starter. We've got Robbie Carrillo, who's been our left fielder, who could certainly play a competent defensive center field. And now, as we talked about, we've got the option with Rivera, who probably not as good as Farley defensively, but looks like he could definitely be even better than Carrillo defensively. I just don't know if the bat is major league ready quite yet. But having him in our organization and having control of him at least through about May 1st gives us a ton of optionality to get to know him better, see what he can do in spring training, and then potentially get close to a month out of him in AAA before we could potentially have him opt out of his contract. So really happy to have both Farley and Rivera on board as potential center fielders for next year, or in the case of Farley, certain center fielders for next year, barring injury. But think that Rivera definitely helps us and feel like he could certainly supplant the likes of Mata or Melinhos or Brito for one of the final spots on our roster as a fourth or fifth outfielder next year. And the calendar is flipped to the new year. Happy 2053. Obviously, bringing on Farley was our big move this offseason to bolster our offense and bolster our defense. Having Rivera in the mix certainly makes us feel good about where we are in terms of our everyday position players. We've got the offer outstanding to Orozco. Another guy we're going to look at is Mario Lafrosia. We're trying to get an updated scouting report on him. You say, why are you doing that? Your scouting accuracy is very accurate. Well, he just recovered from a torn flexor tendon that had him banged up for 10 months. So he literally just became healthy over the last couple days. And he's fragile in terms of his injury at proneness at this point. And he's also looking for $8.5 million. So I think on paper right now, he looks like a really interesting right-handed option for our bullpen that we could potentially fit in salary-wise. Extreme ground ball tendencies, great movement on his pitches, high work ethic. Issues are he's looking for about $8.5 million, and he wants to be a starter. We would envision him as a reliever who we could potentially move into the rotation if we needed to. So given that he's coming off an injury, he's already fragile, and he's looking for pretty big money, want to just see if an updated scouting report now that he's back from that injury tells us anything different than we previously thought. Orozco talked about, we're waiting to hear back from him. Another guy we're thinking about is Tawase Adambamge, who, if you've been playing the OOTP 23 since they lost the license on the Japanese baseball league, you'll notice that you see a lot of South African players who are now there. That is now one of the premier leagues in OOTP universe. And Adambamge certainly looks like he could be an interesting pitcher, another right-hander, ground baller with ground ball tendencies. The movement's not incredible, but his stuff and control are both pretty solid, really nice personality. But he's looking for $14.4 million, and he's fragile. We do have very high scouting accuracy on him at this point. Three-time All-Star over in the South African League. I don't want to spend $14 million a year on him, and we don't have the capacity to spend $14 million a year on him, particularly given the fact that we do need to also keep in mind that Rivera and potentially Orozco are guys who would be potentially eating into the money that we have available at the major league level if we do put them on the 26-man roster when all is said and done. And obviously we need to sign Orozco for that to even be an issue. But if his price comes down, we'd think about him. LaFrosia, wait for the new scouting report on him. Alex Hihar is a guy we've looked at in the past. I think the movement profile certainly fits with our team, but he doesn't really have any ground ball tendencies. We've had other pitchers like that in the past who just haven't been as good as I would have hoped. So trying to kind of keep the focus on keeping the ball on the ground here in Colorado in the 2053 season. So focusing on what to do with the bullpen is going to be the big focus of our next episode. And then we'll also dig deep into any other final changes we make as the preseason begins and we get into spring training, and figure out what this 26-man roster is actually going to look like when we break camp in March. I'm going to have a lot of interesting options with the minor league contracts with major league options for at least Rivera, the 2 Rule 5 guys that we've brought in, and the fact that we've kind of got a logjam of candidates for 4th and 5th outfield. Maybe over the next couple of months we'll put ourselves in a position where we've got a logjam of potential right-handed candidates for the bullpen. So hopefully we'll have some interesting decisions to make coming out of spring training, and we will find out what those decisions are in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.